we are going to record this so that folks who can't join us can view it later. Thank you for joining us. I think everybody here knows me, but in case you don't, my name is Tom Murray. I'm a Director for Professional Development for SSRI, and joined by Dani Carrillo, who is the coordinator for the Fostering Success Program in the Thrive Center. I'm really excited to have Dani here today. Dani's done a great job of building this program on campus to support current and former foster youth and students facing housing insecurity. And we'll go ahead and get started. Dani, given the size, do you want people to ask questions in chat or in audio?
I think either is fine. Feel free to interrupt me. I'm super not formal as far as presenting goes. I know that sometimes this topic can be a little removed from people's like lived experiences and even just like work experiences. So if you have something that you want to ask about or you want to comment on, feel free to unmute yourself, or you're welcome to also put it in the chat. Either way, and if I'm presenting and you put it in the chat, then Tom is going to be monitoring that, and he will he'll stop me and we can kind of chat about that. But I know in the description that it was said like this is going to be more of a discussion. So as I was thinking that through, I was kind of like, well, I'm not really sure who all will be there. And so I actually pulled an older presentation. So if you've seen this before, I'm really sorry. I altered a few things. So if there's something that comes up in that presentation, or you have something that specifically like relates to your role on campus, or just like as a human being in general, feel free to stop me and we can chat about that a little bit more to make it a little bit more accessible and more meaningful for your work.
Cool. Thanks, Dani. So the floor is yours. And
thank you.
I will go ahead and mute myself and let me know in chat if anyone has any issue.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so as Tom said earlier, my name is Dani Carrillo. I am the coordinator for the Fostering Success Program within SSRI in the Thrive Center. And we work with students that have experienced the foster care system, are housing insecure or homeless or unaccompanied youth. So for those of you that have heard of Youth on Their Own, it's an organization in Tucson that works with high school students with those same qualifiers. So we really, we wanted to have matching descriptors so that we could kind of be just like a seamless bridge for those students. So I'm gonna pull up a little PowerPoint presentation for you all, and then we'll just start working our way through. Okie dokie. Oh, no. Okay. All right. So this is just an introduction to our student population. We also work closely with the Department of Child Safety, and we work with other organizations in town that work with these populations of students that are coming to us from high school or community college. So these are a couple of statistics for you just to kind of get an idea for the experiences kind of overall of our populations. And this is specifically for folks that have experienced the foster care system. So we're talking an average of 3% or less, depending on what study you look at. But for students who have been in the foster care system who actually earn a bachelor's degree. So very, very low bachelor's degree completion rates. And so that is kind of where we step in. We try to kind of bridge that gap to be able to provide services and just supports in general for students to be able to earn their bachelor's degree. In Arizona, there are over 4,000 children that are teenagers in the foster care system. So obviously that number fluctuates, but it's been about that number for a few years now. The child welfare system. So I like to talk about the child welfare system just because it seems to be the most well documented. Discussing unaccompanied and at risk of homeless youth is a little bit more gray area-y. There's a lot less formal research on it that is kind of applicable to the broader population of students that we work with. So I do focus a little bit more on foster care and the child welfare system in general. And so, as you can see, the dictionary definition of welfare is the good fortune, health, and happiness or prosperity of a person, group, or organization, and just kind of overall well-being. I just like to highlight that because when we think of wellness, I know on campus we talk a lot about like wellness and welfare, things like that. This is, I just want you to keep that in mind, that when we start talking about those things, when we're talking about folks that have come from a child welfare system, that can look a little bit different. So this is a very confusing like little map that I made up of what the time is like for a teenager in foster care. So this is much more strictly for folks that are in like group homes. Usually, sometimes it's not group homes, but our older youth tend to be living in group homes. So this is like where their time commitments are. It is a lot, as you can see. Like if this was my time commitments, I would be so checked out of everything, which is why you might see some of our students be kind of checked out of things when we're talking about you need to complete all of these requirements, you need to attend these meetings, you need to attend these orientations. It starts to look a lot like this in their minds. So if you kind of go from the top left corner where they're removed from their caregivers and then they're placed into care, this is like kind of all of the requirements that start to be entered into their lives. So I should also mention that most of these required meetings and just like places where they're required to spend their time, this is usually facilitated and scheduled by and managed by their caregiver. So either their group home or their group home manager, their care provider, their foster parent. This is usually managed by someone else. So there's a lot of things pulling at their time, and this is usually coordinated by someone else, and they show up when someone tells them to show up. So I'm not going to go through every little thing, but just to kind of give you an idea of where their time is spent. So when a student is enrolled in Fostering Success and we get them in the student group in U-Access, they're automatically qualified then for priority registration with athletes and honor students, because when they come to college, all of these things might still be a component of their lived experiences. So if they're still living in a group home, they still have to comply with all of these things. If they're not 18 yet, then they still have to attend dependency court hearings. And that looks differently for everyone, right? So it just kind of depends on their own personal situation. So the effects of the child welfare system, these are just a few, but these are kind of the big ones that we see. So they're very institutionalized. So we think sometimes of that with like the juvenile justice system or the justice system in general, the institutionalization of that. So in thinking about that roadmap of where your time is spent, you get very institutionalized, right? That like your experience as a teenager isn't necessarily go to school, come home, hang out with your friends, right? It's like, oh, I have to go to therapy, I have to go to court mandated therapy. And oh no, I accidentally said in front of the wrong person that I tried a drink of alcohol. So now I'm in like substance abuse prevention and programming and group therapy, and I have to go meet with my CASA, and I have to do living skills that are required. And if I want to get this benefit, then I have to go to this meeting. So they're very institutionalized, even just with how they're expected to comply with the rules within their own homes. So in some group homes, things like cell phones and laptops can be considered contraband. So institutionalization of our students is one of those barriers that we have to overcome, and having that as background knowledge that like you're going to be interacting with some students that are highly institutionalized that way, that can be helpful in moving forward and like how you work with them and how you talk with them. Some of them are very secretive and very avoidant of just some of those conversations that you're going to have with them about their circumstances. Like, why are you struggling? What is it that you're really wanting to do? Some of them are they've just been very conditioned to tell you what they think you want to hear, mostly to avoid like having to do extra things, right? That like are not helpful for them or are just feel like a waste of their time. and for like a million other reasons too. They tend to be highly mobile. So getting moved from placement to placement, where they're living in a lot of different places, highly mobile as far as education goes too, that they're coming not necessarily used to living in one spot consistently over a long period of time. Court involvement is also, I would say, a component of institutionalization. So attending court hearings is just like a regular thing for them, right? They're going to their dependency hearings. There's a lot of overlap between the juvenile justice system and the dependency system. And so a lot of court involvement, meeting with lawyers, meeting with CASAs, meeting with representatives of their lawyers to kind of like move their court case forward. That's a component of their lived experience. And then I would say loudly unspoken assumptions. So I think that this is important when we talk about higher education and experiences within higher education. They have experiences with higher education before they ever even think about coming here. And I would say most of those are relatively negative in my own personal experiences with this. They're told that this is just like not a possibility for them. And so a lot of like even my own students and my own staff, we talk about this a lot, like within our training and just like within our community building, like, why are you here? What got you here? Is it because you had this like really great support system that like helped you get here? Or are you here out of spite where you're about to prove everybody wrong? And I would say more often than not, it is out of spite, right? That I'm gonna do this until I can't do it anymore. And maybe they may be right, but they said I couldn't even get here. So knowing that and having that just kind of in the back of your mind, that some of our students are coming here and they don't necessarily have a solid plan or even like a goal other than I'm gonna prove you wrong. Like you said that I couldn't, so I'm gonna do it. So I, in my experiences, at least, the child welfare system starts to really look like the child survival system sometimes. Like the focus tends to be on basic survival, particularly after you are no longer living in a foster care placement. You can still be in the actual foster care system, but living on your own. The focus is very much on basic survival. So that's not necessarily a bad thing always, right? Like we want them to survive. And even within our own program, we focus a lot on basic survival. So because we want them to survive to then be able to start thinking about other things like being a successful student and planning a career path, things like that. The focus also within the child welfare system tends to be case plan compliance. So it's not, I think that in recent years, there has been a push to shift that, right? Where it's individualized and we're really looking at each kid as a holistic person and really individualizing those services based on their needs and their wants, their goals, their struggles to really help them become what it is that they really want to become. So I think that there has been a recent shift in that, but there's still a lot of hurdles to jump over with not looking at them as either compliant or non-compliant. So when we're having some of these conversations about like grades, or just like academic performance or what your academic plan is for the next year, knowing that they're coming from a place where like, you just expect me to be compliant with whatever. Sometimes their reactions will be like, I'm just gonna agree with you because like, I have to agree with you. You're expecting compliance. This conversation is actually a demand for compliance and you're not actually asking me what it is that I want or what's going on. So really having an understanding of that can be helpful in overcoming that hurdle in those conversations. The child welfare system has a ton of turnover. So they're used to hopping from one adult to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and not by their choice, right? So a lot of folks at various times in their time in care don't even know who their caseworker is. Their caseworker is their guardian, by the way, so their legal guardian, and they're not even really sure who that is. So we work with a lot of students that are going through this, right? That like, well, I moved to Tucson now. I'm not sure if I'm transferring to like a Tucson caseworker. I have no idea. I've had 3 caseworkers quit in the last 4 weeks, right? Like I don't know who I'm supposed to be talking to. So when we send them from like one department to another, to another, to another, and we're just kind of best guessing it, that becomes problematic because they're just used to adults not necessarily being there for the long haul. That's not to say like you can't go get other jobs or whatever, but having an understanding that maybe referring them to us in addition to the other departments can be helpful because we're going to be a little bit more long-term and consistent. And then really just like thinking about system capacity, a lot of them as teenagers. So before I worked here at the university, I worked with teenagers in the foster care system. And I have been present for several conversations with high schoolers saying, write down the names of folks that you think you could live with, like family members, extended family members, friends of family. Who can you live with? Who can take you? Because we're just like at maximum capacity. So that's not necessarily the words that were used with them, but that's really how it was interpreted, that like, we just kind of don't want to deal with that. So we want you to like, you need to get out on your own or with someone else, right? That's not us. Okay, so as you can imagine, we deal a lot in the area of trauma. So being part of a child survival system, sometimes you just start to feel like a file. You're a number on somebody's caseload, and that's what you are. That's not everyone's experience. That's not every caseworker's approach to folks. That's not the overall system's goal, but sometimes that's how youth can feel when they are a part of that system. So these are just like a general list of the effects of trauma. So the reason we include these when we talk to folks about like trauma and working with students that have had these lived experiences is because this is gonna be like some of the background with why they react to you the way that they do. The feeling of invisibility, I think it would be hard to say for any staff at the university, like every single student here feels very seen, right? Like that's probably not the case. It's honestly like why Thrive Center exists, right? Because we have a lot of these students on campus that are very unseen in general, and it's our role to make them more seen by us as individuals and staff, by the university in general, by their peers. That's a huge lived experience that like my voice does not matter. I'm completely invisible. An isolating experience of the system for sure. I think coming into higher education, especially this gigantic university that's basically like a whole other city in itself, isolation is a big deal, right? Like if you already feel like you don't belong here and you're here out of spite, even though everyone has told you, you just absolutely cannot achieve this, no matter how hard you try, you don't have what it takes. You're not ready. That's a very isolating way to come into something that's supposed to be exciting and like building your future. And so breaking down that isolation is not something that you can do alone. You need a community to be able to do that. You need advocates to be able to do that. You need to be able to see other people that have those lived experiences be able to do that. And then there's a few others that I just wanted to kind of like put out there for you all. The one that isn't maybe super obvious is expectation of others. So that can look differently for a lot of folks, a lot of different students. But generally, like I would say the overall theme there is disappointment, right? That like, if someone tells you something, don't really expect that that's going to happen, right? That the only one that you can expect anything of is yourself. And even then, like, you tend to be a disappointment sometimes too. So that doesn't necessarily mean that's true. That can just be the feelings of folks that have experienced that kind of trauma. So here's some numbers, some statistics for foster youth that related to their trauma that they're experiencing. And granted, this is not every single student that has been in foster care. This is just overall averages of folks' experiences. So as you can see, like very highly mobile foster youth do experience higher rates of PTSD. I'm going to say overall mental health needs. So there's a lot of hurdles that they're trying to jump over while they're sitting in our offices trying to meet with us about whatever it is that we're talking to them about. These are just some of their academic and social needs. Granted, like we need to look at every individual as that, an individual with very unique needs. But this is just kind of the overall helpful, most pertinent categories, I would say, of the needs that we see students come to us with. You very much come into that in all of these, maybe with the exception of peer support, but professional mentors, helping gather documents, maybe just depending on whatever your role is. But even like campus and community connections, like when you listen to what students are saying to you, you're like, oh, hey, I know this thing on campus, or I know this organization in the community, maybe I can connect you there. Really, those connections are very, very important. And even if that's not really in your role to like really unpack that with them, like connecting them with those opportunities can be really, really helpful. Also, we assist with all of these. So we really focus on success planning, whatever that looks like. It is very individualized for all the youth in our program, or all the students in our program, and what does success really look like for them? We try to help them put those pieces together so that they can start putting pieces together themselves. It's really trying to get them to a point where they're able to take the reins from us, and we work very much alongside them. And we encourage them to start like adding those pieces. And sometimes they're the wrong pieces, and that's okay. But we really try to provide that room that you're gonna fail sometimes, and it's okay. That doesn't mean that you're not meant to be here. It doesn't mean that this is impossible for you. That's not what that means at all. We really are just trying to plan for you to be successful, and knowing that plans almost never work the way you want them to, right? So I'm sure all of you have had that experience with students as they come in to your offices or into your programs, that like, this is my plan. I'm gonna be a doctor because I've always wanted to be a doctor. And then their junior year, they're just like, I literally hate everything about the medical field, right? What do I do? So how, like, working through those things to be successful in whatever way they think that is, right? And that might also mean helping them define what success really is, right? Being a doctor isn't the only thing that makes you successful. So what else is that? And really expanding their definition of what that is. So I kind of talked about this a little bit. I mentioned priority registration. I've had a lot of training in financial aid. So I personally like help folks navigate the financial aid stuff. Our program hires students that have been in the program. So you have to be a participant in the program before you can work for this program. But they also serve as peer mentors. So they do a lot of peer-to-peer support. And even just like those students that don't work for the program, they also serve as peer support for the rest of the students in the program. We really try to provide a community for them. So it's pretty well broadcasted out there who works for this program, right? And so most students come in to an enrollment meeting with me and know that the other students have been in foster care or have been homeless. But I would say more often than not, I would say almost every single time I'm enrolling a student and I say, okay, well, I think I know who I'm gonna match you with for a peer mentor. They've also experienced the foster care system. It's always shock. It's always surprise. Like, what? There's other people here? Like, what do you mean they've been in the foster care system? I was told this is impossible. And it's not a me thing, it's an all of us thing. So really like expanding their perception of the possibilities, right? Like this is, and normalizing that for them, right? Like we are a community, and we're here to support each other, whatever that means. And sometimes that just means like, I need a place to vent where nobody's going to take it personal. Nobody's going to freak out about what I'm saying, that like I am housing insecure. That happens. And they're not going to just like send me somewhere else because they're so panicked that I don't necessarily have a stable place to stay. So really connecting them with others that have had those similar experiences, we've had a lot of success with that. So that's a big deal for us. So I don't think that this is like something that I necessarily need to spell out for you, because it matters, right? Like it matters that our students feel like they have a community, that they belong on this campus, and that they can actually be successful We're obviously here to like retain students. We're here to help them graduate, but not for the numbers, right? We're here to help them do that because they deserve a chance to be able to do that just like everybody else does. We really want to help them change their own narrative, right? About like, what is it that a student from foster care can really achieve? And so the messaging that they've received up to that point where before they get to us is not always very positive, right? That it's kind of like, you should probably start at Pima, and like, I'm not sure if you'll be successful there, or at the local community college, no matter where you are. And there's kind of all of those unspoken messages about like what your narrative is. And we really try to help them write their own narrative. Like, what is it that you want to say about your own experiences? How do you want this story to go? And we also provide trauma-informed services. So in our program, and I would say like even within Thrive Center, we focus more and more on trauma and being trauma-informed. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to know this student's story. You may not know that a student's been homeless or is currently homeless or has been in foster care, but you shouldn't have to. So trauma-informed services and trauma-informed communication is not necessarily something that you pull out of your back pocket just because you know someone has experienced trauma. Most people have experienced some form of trauma in their lives. It should be something that we're all striving for, to communicate in a trauma-informed way. And so there's a lot of different examples that we can unpack there. And if anybody has questions about that or whatever, we can definitely chat about that. But really being trauma-informed in a very general way, right? Like, I don't have to know your very specific trauma. You don't need to tell me all of those things that you've experienced that have been traumatic for you, for me to approach you in a way where you don't feel just like triggered all the time. So where do you come in? So this is kind of like, all of these things are very individualized to you. So mentoring can look very different for each and every single one of you. Mentoring looks different to everyone. So I'm not asking you to say like, hi, I would like to be your formal mentor in life forever, for the rest of your life, your college experience, whatever. Mentoring can look a lot less intensive than that. Mentoring really is you showing up when you say you're going to show up, you saying or you doing what you say you're going to do, and being available. So if you don't have the capacity to do that, then that's okay. That can look different for you, right? If you can have very specific conversations where students can look at you as a mentor in those areas. So I'm gonna say, like, within our office, Michelle is our assessment person. So for her, I'm not necessarily scheduled with her all the time, weekly or even regularly, to talk about assessment. But I consider her a mentor in assessment. So I have a little piece of paper that I keep by me where if I have questions about that, I know I want to go to her for those things. I want to unpack those things with her and consider her a mentor and helping me grow in that area. She's not like consistently like checking in on me and making sure I'm like learning all the things, but I do consider her that, right? So mentoring looks different in a lot of different ways. I consider Tom a mentor for so many things. Sometimes it's just like grounding, right? Like, just like bring me down off the ledge a little bit and give me another perspective here. Help me see this from a different point of view. Some of my student staff, I consider mentors for me. They have expertise in a lot of different areas, and really using that knowledge and those lived experiences to mentor me. It's a very cyclical thing within our program. Connecting with resources, that can be anywhere. It can be on campus, off campus, on the internet, online, right? Now we live online for everything. So connecting with other resources, things that you have found helpful, that's like a podcast. A podcast can be a resource. So really connecting them with resources is helpful, because they may not have anyone else having that conversation or recommending that. So listening to them, listening to your gut really helps in moving conversations forward with these students and helping them become more successful in whatever it is that they're trying to be successful at. And really hearing what they have to say and what they're looking for, being willing to hear that and then also respond to that in a way where you're listening to your gut, right? That I use a podcast example because I worked with an academic advisor that had said that they were really struggling, that like a student had disclosed some traumatic experiences, but it was something that had kind of come up in this podcast, and they thought, well, I don't know, I don't have this lived experience, maybe I shouldn't say anything. But then they just ended up leaning into their gut, and they said, you know what, I listened to this podcast, I don't know if it could be helpful for you. And it was really helpful. And so the advisor followed up with me and was like, oh my gosh, you're right, like I don't need to be an expert in homelessness to recommend things that I've had exposure to, right, that like might be helpful for someone other than just me, that might be helpful for folks that have different lived experiences. And then be an informed believer. So I know that I talked a lot about different systems, the homeless systems that we're interacting with, the juvenile justice system, the dependency system. And there's a lot of non-belief there, right? That like, not necessarily that I don't know that you're capable of that, but it might just be, I'm not sure that I can support you doing that because I don't know enough about it. So that feels just like I'm setting you up for failure, but just like really believing in their ability to be successful. And the more they feel like you have an investment in them, even if it's just like, oh my gosh, that's wonderful, like you can totally do that, you have some work to do, you have a long road ahead of you, but you can absolutely do that, that will open them up to be more honest with you, right, about like, okay, well, like tell me more about this work, right, believing that they can do it. They know if you believe that they can do it or not. If you're just like, whatever, like you're probably going to fail, most people fail, even if that's true, that's taken a little bit more personal from a student that has had some of these lived experiences before they get to our campus. So these are some ideas for things that we have in our future programming. Obviously, like depends on our capacity, our funding, things like that. But really just like engaging with more youth at younger ages, right? That not necessarily just when they get to the U of A, but also like when they're in high school, like how do you prepare to get here? Because you may not have an adult that is having that conversation with you. You may not have any adults that think this is even ever going to be accessible to you. So really helping prepare them to succeed in higher education is something that we have our eyes set on. Really being a support system for social welfare agencies across the state of Arizona. And I would say even to a certain extent across the country, we've provided some consulting for other folks that are trying to help do similar things. Really having alumni or faculty and staff mentorship. So adding an additional mentoring component to our program so that students have other adults that they can rely on. And then centralizing resources on our campus is a big one. Making things a little bit more accessible, even like transportation wise. I know like now that we're kind of in this virtual reality of things, that looks a little bit differently and maybe even a little bit easier for certain things, but it's something that we're really working towards, is to centralize resources for students. That is my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? I'll leave this up for anybody that needs my email address. It's just my first and last name at arizona.edu. I would also encourage you, if you have a student that you're working with that qualifies for this program, I would just encourage you to email connect them with me so they know what you're saying to me, and also so that I know what they know about the program as well.
Dani, I have a question.
Sure.
So is there anything specific, given COVID and what's happening, is there any specific that we should be looking out as like extra traumas for foster care students during this time now that they're virtual?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes like red flags are a little bit different in virtual formats. So I would say like being very aware of a student's environment that they're meeting with you, and that's really hard to do because it requires a lot of like recognition of subtle cues, right? And so, but being willing to ask them, like, I'm asking you if you're struggling. And if you're sensing like the answer that you're giving me just feels like you're not telling me the whole story, or it just feels like you might be lying to me, it might be because they are not in a place where they can have that conversation. They're not in a physical location where they feel like they can have that conversation. So I would say that is an added component of existing more in a virtual format, that when students aren't in our offices and having these conversations, we're a little bit more in control of that environment, right? When they're meeting with us over Zoom or whatever, it's harder to know, right? Because like you have no idea where I'm at. Like for all you know, I'm at the beach. I can't really do that just well, right? But I'm obviously not. So I think like really being aware of the situation that your students are in, the living situation that your students are in, and like being receptive to that and responded to that can be very, very helpful, and also very, very tricky. Does that answer your question, Michelle?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dani, I have a question.
Sure.
How do students generally get connected with you in your office? Or I saw that, you know, obviously on your site and the kind of outreach that you are doing. So is that how you kind of find the students, or do they find out about your services and find you, or both, or kind of how does that work?
I would say it's a wide variety. Because of the work that I did before I came to the university, I was already pretty well connected with a lot of service providers in Tucson area, and also just kind of across the state of Arizona. And so when I came over to the university, it was like my number one thing first. I just emailed them all my new contact information, like, hey, I'm here. The University of Arizona has this program. We're here. I'm your point person for that. So like communicate with me, right? So we're very connected to those organizations. So the folks that are meeting with students outside of like all of the U of A stuff, most of them are, I hope most of them are aware that we exist, and that we're here to serve as a support for students. So I get a lot of connections from them. Students that have been in the foster care system, depending on the specifics of their experience and like kind of the age that they were in, might qualify for additional funding. So that organization that provides that funding, I work really closely with them. So they connect students with me. We're on the Next Step Center also. So if students say that like they have one of these lived experiences, it will come up on their Next Step Center saying like, hey, you should contact this program. We do a lot of admissions outreach. I have access to FAFSA data as well. So I can offer financial aid support for students that on their FAFSA have indicated one of those 3 qualifiers. So I do that outreach as well. And then honestly, just like other folks on campus, like advisors, other folks in the financial aid department, and really just kind of everywhere, tend to like email connect students with me. So there is actually on our website, it's fosteringsuccess.arizona.edu. And I'll go ahead and share my screen so you all can see that as well. So honestly, some students find us through our website as well. So this is what the website looks like. There's a join button on every single page, and even within the text as they're reading, you know, kind of like what the program is and things like that. There's just like a million places they can click join. And a lot of folks do fill out this interest form. So we try to present for different groups. So like, for example, we have New Start is happening right now, the summer program for incoming freshmen. And they all received a presentation from me on the very first day of New Start, like, hey, I work very closely with New Start. This is who we are. This is kind of like the supports that we provide. And within like 45 minutes, we had 6 different interest forms, right? So, and a lot of those students know each other. So I would say Yodo is a really good example for that like Yodo will tell a lot of their youth that are coming to the university, hey, Fostering Success is there. You should reach out to them. You qualify for Yodo, you qualify for them. And so as they see like other folks that they know were also in Yodo, they'll tell them like, oh, hey, you should do this thing. And they'll kind of connect them with me. So it's just a multitude of ways. Even though this interest form does exist, it's not required by any means. If it's another staff on campus, it's so much easier if they just email connect me with them. And it's a little bit more trauma-informed way to do it. See, we're like circling the trauma-informed care, because a lot of our students are coming to us from systems that they're used to this caseworker or this other system, like just referring them to other services and saying like, here's your entire file, you know everything, this is kind of a requirement, so done, right? They don't really know what was said about them. They don't really have any say in the matter, but usually like if a staff on campus, even if they don't know what to say, even if they're like, I don't really remember what this program does, I don't really know what they offer, but like I think you might qualify for it, so I'm just going to email connect you. When they CC that student, I will pick that conversation up, and then they say they know what was said about them, and that tends to be a little bit more successful than just saying like, here's this interest form, go fill it out. So there's, I don't know if that actually answered the question, but there's just so many ways that students referred to us.
Couple of quick follow-ups, if it's okay. About how many students are identified that we have on campus, and is there a way to see that them in new access, like is it a student group or anything like that, that we would be able to know that a student is affiliated with, with that group? So
yes, after they enroll in the program, I do add them to the Fostering Success student group in U Access, but that's only after they actually sit down and have a meeting with me. So how many students qualify on campus is all kind of a whole other presentation, and it kind of just depends on like what you believe, I suppose, like what source you believe. FAFSA data shows like about roughly between like 400 and 500. We receive about 400 to 500 FAFSAs a year for students that report that they would qualify for this program. So that also just gets into like a whole other discussion about like how that's incredibly confusing and kind of restrictive on the FAFSA. So a lot of folks that do qualify for this program don't actually say that on the FAFSA. In 2016, we did the campus climate survey, not we, but like the university did the campus climate survey, and they found that around 20% of undergraduate students had experienced housing insecurity. So all of those students would qualify for the program. Like if you are considered housing insecure, you qualify. And our definition of housing insecure is pretty lenient, I would say. So it's kind of up to the student. Like if I don't have stable housing, if they feel like they're housing insecure, then they're housing insecure, and we will step in and provide some assistance there. So that's like potentially thousands, right? Like that's like 8,000 students that would qualify for that. So, and I'm going to say like COVID we've also seen an uptick just across the nation in college students becoming more housing insecure as a result of all of COVID stuff happening. So I would say our potential pool of students that are qualified is just bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. And also something that I should mention is that, which I don't know that anyone else actually gets in the weeds like this, but on the FAFSA, it asks you, have you been in the foster care system? Have you experienced foster care since the age of 13 or over? So our qualifiers are different from that. It's if you've ever experienced foster care. So, which is why we ask that now on the application for admission. And we really try to capture as many students as we possibly can so that they at least have access to the information that we exist and that we're here if they want to be a part of what we got going on. Yes, did I answer all your questions? I'm so sorry.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Amy, I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
So one, just to clarify, students don't need to be incoming students, right? Like if a third-year student all of a sudden is housing insecure, they can get connected. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. If a fifth year student is housing insecure or is like, oh my gosh, I just realized that this is a thing. This is like available to me. And also, I also wanted to say that if you're working with students, that say like, I've had experience with homelessness or something, but you don't feel like they need support, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't refer them to the program. We actually have a lot of students that come into the program because they want to be an advocate for their peers. They want to work for this program. They want to use this program to like build a community, not only for themselves, but also for their peers that are maybe not in a stable of a place in their lives right now. So we have plenty of students that come to this program, not because they're panicked and they're just like on the streets, right? So there's a multitude of reasons that students come into this program. And I would say there's also like a resistance to that sometimes as well, that like, I don't actually want to be identified as in foster care or formerly in foster care, or I've been homeless. I don't want to be like outed like that. And so, and that's okay. You email connecting them to me doesn't commit them. It doesn't do anything where they're gonna be all of a sudden like identified as this thing that they don't want to be identified as. And even if they don't enroll in the program to get connected with a peer mentor or anything like that, does not mean that I won't help them. Like if they want to talk with another student in the program, I'm going to connect them with my student staff. If they need help accessing community or campus resources, I'm going to help them, so that it doesn't commit them to anything at all. So even if there's resistance, encourage them to be like willing to have that conversation, if for no other reason than to just like know what supports are available to them, and they can choose to take advantage of that or not.
Awesome. And then the other one I have, you've mentioned a couple of times now, trauma-informed services and then trauma-informed communication. Do you know of any resources for folks who might not be well-versed in what that means, that they can kind of develop a better understanding of what trauma-informed services or communication might be?
So I'm actually in the process of creating a training for all of Thrive Center for trauma-informed services, to be a little bit more, I guess, like not as specific to my own program and our like the fostering success student populations. So we're actually creating that within Thrive. There are a lot of resources on trauma-informed care out there. I would say there are a few that I can maybe, I don't know if there's like going to be an email or something that can be sent out to participants, or like we can add links or something. But there are a few that are pretty reputable and are really accessible. So I can send those out after this as well. I can compile like a short little list. We also have like the life management services. We have CAPS. And so there's always folks that have like higher levels of like licensures, training in that arena. And so those are also very good resources to connect with, that like, hey, I heard this random like trauma-informed thing. What does that even mean? I'm not like offering their time or capacity, but if you have connections with folks that work in the mental health field for a living, it might also be something that you ask them, like, hey, what would you recommend? But I can definitely send out some pretty accessible links for that. I will try not to overwhelm you with that. But if you want to know more about that as well, feel free to reach out to me too. Like our team, our program spends a lot of time on being very trauma informed and responsive in our interactions with everyone, not just our students.
Thank you. Well, I don't hear or see any other questions. Thank you so much, Dani, for your time.
Yeah.
It was great to have this session today. Thank you everyone for joining us. For those of you who might listen or view the recording later, the links that Dani sends to me, I will put on the website, the workshop website on the SSRI webpage, so you can check out those links there.
Thank you all for attending. It was fun to talk about this. As you see, I will talk about this till I'm blue in the face. So feel free to reach out to me if you have other questions, or if you'd like me to have a more in-depth chat with you or your team. I'm happy to do that as well.